WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Incredibly busy week around here. I threw out a missive and a blog earlier in the week in regard to the knee and in regard to what the knee means to me, my family, my wife, my company, my radio station after 20-plus years now of doing sports radio here in Baltimore, when we have sponsors who say, well, yeah, the Raven shows were good for years, but we can't have them in our bar anymore because our audience doesn't want to support them. Then we get into the business of sports and the macro and the micro and all of that stuff. And I can't think of anyone I respect more or enjoy discussing more local business issues with than this guy. He is a sports professor of business, economy, and all sorts of things at Georgetown University. He is our friend here for a long, long time and the longtime architect of the Orioles and parts of their business machine back in the 1980s and 90s, and then on to the Texas Rangers, amongst other places. Also the Major League Baseball offices. He lives here in the DMV and teaches down at Georgetown. We welcome the one, the only, Marty Conway, back on to WNST, where you can follow him out on LinkedIn, out on Twitter, and anywhere. Good thoughts and lots of experience in this, Marty. Where were you in 81 when the baseball strike, and in 94 on the baseball strike? I was on the radio in 94, and it damn near put me out of business before my business got going because we didn't have a football team here. This is a unique crisis in 2017 now, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I was smack dab in 94. I was smack dab in the middle. I was at the Rangers, and we actually had built a new stadium. Imagine that. And we lost the last 2 months of the season, any opportunity to be in the postseason, canceled the World Series. It was really a defining point for me because I realized that if the folks that I worked for and the players that I worked with were willing to throw it all away, and like you said, what they had already earned, 80% of their salary, and they had everything to gain. We, as individuals, as just employees of the business, we were left holding the bag. We were told we might have to take reductions in staff, we might have to take reductions in pay. All of this, and certainly the owners weren't going to suffer for sure. They had insurance and all sorts of other things. So I think what we're going to talk about is how these circumstances are handled at the highest levels impact lots of people, and until these sort of stories come out, I don't think most of the folks in leadership positions truly understand what the impacts are to everyday folks whose economies and lives and pocketbooks sometimes depend on how these circumstances are handled.
All right, let's start at the top here. You saw Kaepernick take the knee last year. I think we talked about it in passing. I mean, it wasn't a local story, but it certainly is a national story. He is still unemployed at the quarter pole here, despite the fact that E.J. Manuel is going to be quarterbacking for the Raiders this week as we go out there. And, the bench, we saw a Chief sit on the bench on Monday night after the murders in Las Vegas. It's been a pretty tumultuous time here, as predicted when the Orange Man was voted president a year ago. We knew this was not going to be a time of sort of pacifists in America, I guess.
No, and look, with all due respect, and you can go all the way back to the Olympics in the 30s and the 60s, and we have all sorts of experiences, and Jim Brown and all sorts of past experiences. This is not new territory on these kind of divisive or even racially charged issues to deal with. But it's amazing to me how the NFL in particular has allowed this to sort of linger and metastasize and work its way down to the lowest levels, into Facebook and all the other places of everyday lives, to literally be a dividing point between now fans, not just between fans of, you're an Eagles fan or a Ravens fan, but now you're having to choose standing for the national anthem, sitting for the national anthem, the flag, whatever. I think.
Well, you're really choosing black or white there too. Let's cut the dog whistle out. You're picking a black or white side here.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly parts of it, but people that are white have supported people that are black, and vice versa. But having said that, the point is that when you look at how real leadership, and here's a dichotomy. A couple of years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, when the NBA had the issue with the LA Clippers, right, and Donald Sterling made the comments that were recorded, what did Adam Silver do as a, frankly, brand new commissioner? He stepped in, handled the situation, and from the point that it occurred until Donald Sterling was out of the league was 88 days, right? Less than 3 months. compare that to how this has been handled in the National Football League, and as you said, we're now into our,
14th month,
18th,
right?
14th month of this, right?
Right.
And this is a classic case of just poor leadership up and down. And when I say, I don't just say Roger Goodell, but I say that the committee that he works for, the competition committee, all folks like that, even down to the local ownership, I have yet to see one circumstance where it's really been handled where I could say, I really think they've handled it well. And then we come down to the circumstance I know that you ultimately want to talk about, which is the pregame before the Ravens and Steelers. It was another example of just sort of how the lack of accountability has allowed this to linger on down to the fans level, which has been this divisive issue.
Well, you're very critical of the Ravens because they did this in a sort of secretive way. They did not announce what they were going to do. That being said, these people are out in the parking lot getting lubed up. I don't know that they're really even there for a football game to some degree. It was a circus-like atmosphere. It was circus-like all week, along racial divides, along American or anti-American divides. The side that's not listening will not listen. I mean, that is very, very clear that there is no listening going on. And I think at the heart of this, and I don't want to say, well, I don't want to get too political. I mean, I've got an open mouth here and free speech in America, and I've kept my mouth shut long enough about this, Marty. But I don't want to talk to just anybody about this. I want to talk to intelligent people about this. But that being said, Kraft, Jones, Snyder, these are all of Trump's biggest supporters. They were never going to take a position that was going to be offensive to him personally, and they wanted him elected. They wanted him to be president. They supported him. They spent millions of dollars supporting him. So if he wants men of all colors and races and creeds to stand, and he's going to call them SOBs out on Twitter, and we all know behind this, anyone that's done any research on this at all knows Trump's feelings about the National Football League and that they didn't let him in, and the USFL, and the embarrassment of the dollar lawsuit 30 years ago. This is his chance to get even with them and screw their business up. And he's done a real nice job at that over the last 10 days of being the great divider that he has been since he's come onto the political scene.
Well, he's, and I think you and our good friend, if you will call it that, Bruce Springsteen referred to Donald Trump as a flaming narcissist, right? So however you want to describe his politics, clearly he's going to put himself at the center of any discussion. It doesn't matter whether it's this discussion, hurricane relief, anything else. He's going to put himself at the center of it. But the principal point, I think, is that there has been opportunities here, and I'll go back to the Adam Silver circumstance. If you look at what Adam Silver did, he was the modern playbook for how to handle a modern crisis, right? Which the first three steps are the most important steps. And number one, you emphasize your organization or your personal past history with these kinds of issues, right? So it was an opportunity for either the NFL or, frankly, for some of the individual owners to step forward in their markets and emphasize that. The second thing is for that individual, because there are 30-some individuals who own teams, is to step forward and take the responsibility for what's going to happen. I don't think that, my critique, if you will, of what the Ravens did on Sunday was to do it over the loudspeaker, create something that was sort of a PR-driven moment, appease the players, the coaches, or however they wanted to handle this from a unity standpoint. But I think it could have all done better had the leader, in this case perhaps the owner in this case, or certainly the president, but likely the owner, step forward, do the kind of on-camera interviews, do the sort of mini town hall, go on all the various media outlets because there's so many that cover it, and handle this in a one-by-one basis. So that's step number two. And then number three is part and parcel to that, which is talk to customers directly, talk to fans directly. At that point, if they want to be angry, let's be angry at the owner. Let's not be angry at the players or the staff or other people along that. So if you would step forward and just do those three things in the course of the last 1, 2, or 3 weeks, have some online town halls, take some of this anger and sort of absorb it and take it on personally so that your sponsors and your employees and your players don't have to deal with that. So I think the difference is that's what Adam Silver did. Adam Silver stepped forward, said, I'll take responsibility for this. This is the league's long history with dealing with these kind of issues in a productive way. And then thirdly, he was available at every media outlet that really wanted to talk to him in any sort of forum. That's why he was able to bring this to rest within 90 days. Not doing that by the NFL in their business model of sort of dodging the bullet, standing behind something, leading from behind, I think has allowed this to linger on for such a long time, to the point where a president, local sponsors, other people jump in and then take this position, which is incredibly divisive. However you feel about it, the reality is it's been incredibly divisive, and I don't think it's really needed to be that way.
Well, they've done a poor job. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And the anger feels even more inflamed 10 days later on every side. I think the players who aren't kneeling are pissed that they're not kneeling to some degree. I think the players that are standing have felt like they've won, at least for now, and everyone's going to shut up and play nice. But that really was the directive of the president: is shut up. Stand up and shut up, and that's the way we're going to do things in America on Sunday afternoons. And I think that's going to be a problem all the way along. And I don't know that we're anywhere near the end of this. And now we have mass murders on top of this, and we still have the confusion of what exactly is your message as a league when Colin Kaepernick's still unemployed. I mean, literally, if you kneel, you won't be employed. If you kneel, we won't watch your games. If you kneel, we're going to burn our jerseys. I mean, we've seen all this over the last 10 days, and as much as I thought it was fringe mayhem, there were empty seats on Sunday, and I know it'll cost the Ravens a couple of beers or a couple of hot dogs or a couple of parking spaces, but to your point, those tickets are already sold.
Yeah, when we were talking earlier, I mentioned the fact that largely, I think the reason why the NFL and perhaps some of the teams have handled this so poorly is that they're so well insulated from a financial perspective. And that is the media deals, for example, are gold-plated and bulletproof for another 3, 4, 5 years and multi-million dollars. If you're a local NFL franchise, you're going to get checks over the course of the year totaling about $240 million for the national revenues, and your player cap payroll is $165, and you got another $35 million in player costs. But what you don't see is if this were the flip side, if they were largely dependent on local revenues, and this was the difference between profit and loss in any year, I think perhaps it might be a way to deal with it differently. But that insulating blanket, if you will, of national revenues, I think has largely impacted why the NFL and their owners and leadership have tried to sort of Heisman this thing, which is, if we can just hold it off for a little bit longer, the public will get distracted and they'll move on to something else. And that is part and parcel to the fact that the NFL's playbook has been to license themselves in every category, from media to sponsorship to breast cancer to you name it. And once you do that, now you're starting to touch everybody, and it forces the media, who are in this case investigative media, to go to all these other areas who are licensing the NFL brand and saying, how do you feel about it? How do you feel about it? How do you feel about it? And so what you find is a whole lot of neutrality. You find that people in the business side of it don't really want to take a position on it. They're hoping that it blows over. But in your case and other cases locally, people are saying, I'm hearing from some portion of my fan base how they feel about this. And so I'm just going to go on down the road and sort of protect the majority of my revenue, even if that means I have to give away some portion of it, which shouldn't have to happen. I think locally and on a regional level, that if the NFL and their owners did a much, much better job of handling this, this would not have been into its second full season now of being an issue.
He is Marty Conway, longtime sports executive here in Baltimore with the Orioles, as well as with the Texas Rangers in Major League Baseball and AOL and a whole bunch of places. He is now a professor of sports business and traveling over to the Middle East on various points as a consultant with the Qatari Sports Commission. He is Marty Conway on Twitter, as well as at LinkedIn, and the sports prof down at Georgetown University. All right, so on a local level, I get a call this week from a sponsor of mine where we've been doing live radio shows up in Carroll County for the better part of a decade, quite frankly. And he said, I can't have the shows here anymore. My Ravens crowd is angry at the Ravens. They don't want the shows here anymore. They don't want to support the shows anymore. They're not even coming in and watching the games. I'm hearing that from sports bars around the community, that people are boycotting their local sports bar on Sunday and not watching the NFL now. I find this whole notion to be kind of absurd on a local level. I'm sure we will find another fantastic place to host show. Hell, I'll open up the radio station. We'll just do it down in the basement. I'll bring Tony Jefferson out there, and we'll swab whoever comes out, and we'll do some radio. But that being said, I've done it this way for 22 and a half years now, Marty, and I don't know that I've ever seen one of these. A cancellation in the middle of the season based on some sort of principle that I don't even understand, because I'm a Constitution guy and I believe in free speech and I believe in dissent and I believe in protest. I believe in all of those things that shaped our country. I don't believe in shut up and do what the orange man, the orange authoritarian tells me. So, I have some real problems with all of this at a foundational level, and I think all of us are thinking this through, thinking about what our beliefs are and why we believe in a flag and why we have a constitution and why we have an elected government, why we have an alleged democracy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing that we're all talking about civics. The problem is I had a really good social studies teacher. There's a lot of people that didn't, apparently.
Well, that is a point. This was and is an opportunity, just as, Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, Muhammad Ali, John Carlos, Tommy Smith, all these were opportunities. Now, again, they were incredibly unpopular at the time.
And uncomfortable, right?
I just want to remind people that when Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals in 1936 at the Berlin Olympics, when he came back to the United States, he couldn't even go to the White House because at that point, black people were not even allowed to be in the White House except for servants. He couldn't go into his favorite restaurants. He had to go through the back door. So here was an emerging, here was a new hero.
Well, as did Louis Armstrong, as did Jackie Robinson, as did Satchel Paige, all the way along the line, right?
So as I said, this, decades on, there's plenty of opportunity to learn from this, although sometimes there's quite a bit of lag time. But I think the point is that, again, back to the issue of how this has been poorly handled, is because many, many, many of these NFL players are really committed in the community. I mean, you've talked about a few of them. You can go back and talk about Steve Smith and all the other folks in the past who've done an incredible job. And as a result of this being sort of inflamed, it's like having a wound that's been inflamed suddenly that was sort of always there, and we sort of dealt with it. It's unfortunately overshadowed all of the great things that these folks as individuals and groups do, including what the team does in the community. I mean, make no mistake, the team has renovated classrooms and renovated schools and parks and football fields.
And we're the first ones on the bus going into a divided community during a riot 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that to that point, like I said, they've done so many great things as an organization and players that this set of incidents in the way that they've been handled has erased people's memory of that, at least in the short term, and it's impacting us. Now, there will be people that step forward and feel a constitutional principle, they want to assert that, and they want to support that, and they want to be part of that. There will be some sort of transition, I think, on this, but ultimately, it's going to take a concerted effort on behalf of the NFL and their owners to go into these local communities and say, this is how we're going to handle it. We're going to take the Adam Silver playbook and we're going to play it right here, right now, because by Thanksgiving, we want this issue to be kind of settled as much as possible so that we can really focus on the rest of the NFL agenda, because if not, this is going to continue to seep into the media. It's going to continue to seep into their sponsors and licensees. And ultimately, they're going to lose somebody along the way that's going to be substantial to them. And then at that point, I think they will have to act, and they can only hope at this point that it doesn't get worse, that there's not some sort of other incident that occurs in this country that forces the players to rally around, something like that. So I just see the dichotomy very clear between the NFL and the NBA, and you can put some other leagues on the side of that. And if this is a mess in their backyard, it's a mess of their doing, and unfortunately, you're now seeing how it impacts local businesses, people that have their sign on the door, your business, and it's become much more of an issue for you all than it is for a team that has hundreds of $millions coming in national revenue, but not really seeing the collateral damage and the spillover that's occurring.
He is Marty Conway, our longtime sports executive and business insider at Georgetown University. The last thing for you, Players Association. I haven't heard much about this. The Players Association represents black and white and east and west and rich and poor and young and old and all of that stuff. This is a very, very sticky situation inside those four walls as well, as it is in every single locker room for every team. And dissent, I mean, this is going to wreck some teams on the field. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But from the Players Association, I think it's even more sticky, right?
Yeah, and the Players Association, just to be clear, has a similar business model to the NFL. They are yes, they do represent the players, and they do handle all, union negotiations and other sorts of things, but their business model is to license the players for commercial opportunity, whether it's, small groups of players or games, postseason senior games for incoming players and different things like that. So again, I think they have tried to assert themselves. It's kind of half measures. They've kind of assert themselves as defending people's right to express themselves in speech, but they're also heading towards a neutrality position because they have sponsors and commercial endorsers who I'm sure they feel like if they push this issue too much, they're going to have trading card companies and other people saying, hey, look, because of your inflaming this issue, my sales are declining precipitously during the course of the season, and that's not something that they want. So, again, having to deal with this certainly is a delicate issue, but if you deal with it in the way that the NBA has, there's been no collateral damage. There hasn't been a second year of this. They're going to kick off their season in the next week or two. Adam Silver has said, according to their guidelines, the players will stand. And I'm sure there's other ways that they're going to allow the players to express themselves in other media, but it's not going to be part of the game experience itself. And again, I think they will be by December, January. People will say, here's another way that the Midas touch of Adam Silver and his owners have it over the NFL owners by a factor of 10 or 12 times.
Marty, anything you want to throw in here about the Major League Baseball playoffs? I mean, that was your bread and butter many, many years ago, and really quiet pennant races through September. Obviously, the Orioles are going to have their hands full here in the offseason, and that's the Masters class for next week or further on Machado and all the incredible things that the Orioles are going to have to go through here in the offseason. But meantime, playoffs are here. This is sort of the money shot for Major League Baseball. They got a bunch of good teams. Looks like a good tournament ahead, right?
Yeah, I would, if I could add one thing, it would be this. I would like to see this wild card format expand to a 2-game format. And you say, why do you say 2, not 3? I think it would be incredibly exciting if in the wild card format over 2 days, back to back, you don't have to take a day off necessarily if you don't want, but to have a game in each park of the wild card teams, and have if it's a split 1-1, let's do like they do in global soccer, which is then we go to goals for, right? So if the game is in New York and the next day is in Minnesota, and if the Yankees win day 1 and the Twins are winning day 2, let's look at it as a combined total runs. That way, if the Twins are winning in the second game and it's still a 2-1 score and it's close, those last 3 innings are now powerful. Not only might the Yankees lose the game, but they might score enough runs to have a run differential to win the game. I think that'd be pretty exciting and compelling, and it would get away from the notion that, well, you play 162 to get down to 1 game, right? Anything can happen. Let's play it over 2 games, and if the teams are split in that second game, let's go to a run differential. I think it would create something really interesting in the last 3 or 4 innings of that second game if it looks like the teams are going to split.
Kind of fascinating they're starting the season in March next year, right?
March 26th or 29th or something like that, which is the whole idea is to try to start the season a little bit earlier, give teams more off days. And the second thing they're doing is many more, you're going to see next year, many more 4-game series, none of the 2-game series and fewer of the 3-game series, because they're going to try to cut down on the days that teams are traveling in hopes that will raise the quality of play, but also lower the risk of injury and illness and things like that are keeping some of these players off the field.
Feels sensible, right? I mean, there's sensible tact by Rob Manfred, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, at one point, I'd like to see teams, if they're going to travel, if they're going to come from the West Coast and they're going to spend 10 days on the road, play in Boston, play in Baltimore, play in Atlanta, go home, right? So do more of that and have less of point-to-point travel and different things of sort. So I think they're working on it, but the issue in baseball is the schedule is done so far in advance. It's up to 2 years now that to implement any change in the schedule really takes a long time. But I give Rob Manfred a lot of credit. The Little League game that he's had up there in Williamsport with the major league teams and other things that little by little each year, I think they're trying to move baseball in a very positive direction, and we'll see what happens here in the playoffs with ratings and the teams and all that, and through the World Series.
We'll let you get back to educating the young men and women of America down there in Georgetown. We'll be following you out on LinkedIn as well as on Twitter. Always a pleasure, always educational. Thanks, Marty. Appreciate you, man.
You got it, man. Good luck.
Marty Conway, longtime sports business executive with the Baltimore Orioles as well as the Texas Rangers, painting an enlightening picture of all things NFL and knee and business and micro and macro. If you have not heard, we will be finding a new spot for our Ravens live shows after 8 years up at Carroll County Greenmount Station. I want to thank those folks up there. They have decided to move on because their audience hasn't been coming out to Ravens games on Sunday. So that's unfortunate, but we will be continuing to swab for the bone marrow registry and getting players on the registry and educating folks and talking football as we've been doing here since it's Ravens established 1996. I'd say we established live Purple shows in 1996 as well, and we will continue on. But I am, I'm shedding light on how the knee affects me and my family and my business and what we do here in Baltimore. So have at it. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Snapchat, I'm everywhere you are. Facebook Live and our YouTube WNSTV live channel as well. Anything you miss here, you can find in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life guaranteed. Last but never least, breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That is all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis Kolatzos will be here on Thursday, driving you home from 3 until 5, getting you ready for the Ravens in Oakland to face E.J. Manuel this weekend. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.